Investing into dividend stocks is a great way to diversify your S&P 500 exposure, where it's a known fact that dividend-paying stocks, on average, tend to be less volatile than non-dividend paying stocks. But the biggest thing to be aware of with dividends, especially if you are not looking for strictly income, is that if you're going to hold this for a long time, you want to make sure that there is significant growth along the investment. For example, if you earned a 12% annual return with a 3% dividend yield, if you took the dividends as income, that means your investment would have still grown 9% that year. Where if you instead had a 4% annual return with an 8% dividend yield, if you took the dividends as income, your investment would have actually lost value at -4% that year. Knowing that, let's get straight to it by first going over the iShares Core Dividend Growth ETF with the ticker DGRO. Now this fund tracks the Morningstar US Dividend Growth Index, where it has 417 holdings, with the top ones being Johnson & Johnson and JP Morgan. You'll also notice on the right how much weight each company has in the fund, where Johnson & Johnson carries the most weight at 3.04%, where the top 10 holdings make up 26% of the entire fund. And so if we combined all the stocks that are inside of this fund, it comes out to be that the healthcare sector has the most exposure, covering just over 18% of the fund, with financials and technology thereafter. Another nice thing about DGRO is that it has a low expense ratio of 0.08%, which is the total cost it takes to own the fund per year, and is going to be automatically distributed throughout the time of owning the fund. It's not something you have to pay all up front or any separate time. But knowing that, it pretty much means that if you had $10,000 in this fund, after a full year, it would have cost you $8, which is literally the price of a pizza, where the amount of dividends and growth I'm about to show you easily outweigh the cost. But moving on from that, the average dividend yield over the trailing 12 months is 2.19%, which means $10,000 invested after a full year. If you took the dividends as income, that would be $219 per year. And because DGRO pays dividends quarterly, that would be $55 every 3 months. And not to mention, but the dividends have actually grown significantly over the past 12 months at a rate of 10.84%. So with this ETF, the dividends you earn are stated to be 100% qualified, which means that you can reap long-term capital gains, where if we include the standard deduction for 2024, assuming you're married filing jointly, that's $29,000. So if the total income for you and your spouse, including work, dividends, and capital gains, is all under $123,000, then you'll be taxed 0% on your dividends. Besides that, DGRO has a 45% overlap with the S&P 500. Its best year over the past 10 years grew 29.87%. The worst year was -5.56%, where the returns over the past year was 21.96%. Then the average over the past 5 years was 11.84% per year, with the past 10 years being 11.88%. So even if you decided to take the dividends as income every year, your portfolio would still see significant growth. With that said, let's now go on to the number 2 ETF, that is the WisdomTree US Quality Dividend Growth Fund, ticker DGRW. Now this fund tracks the WisdomTree US Quality Dividend Growth Index that has 301 holdings, which consist of companies like Microsoft and Apple, where you're probably thinking this is just like the S&P 500 fund, but if you continue looking, you'll notice other companies like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble, Home Depot, Coca-Cola, and United Health Group are all some of the strongest dividend-paying companies, where if you add these up, the top 10 holdings make up 37% of the entire fund. So looking at the top sectors, there's infotech, then healthcare, industrials, financials, and consumer staples thereafter. Of the 6 funds that I'm mentioning in this video, DGRW has the highest expense ratio of 0.28%, and although that is high compared to many other low-cost index funds, these fees are included in the historical returns, where even with that, DGRW would have grown your money the most out of all the funds I'm mentioning in this video. Before I mention that, the dividend yield for this fund over the trailing 12 months was 1.56%, where there is a 48% overlap between DGRW and the S&P 500. So if we look back at DGRO, that fund is 45%, so they're not too far off. But from there, the best year over the past 10 years for DGRW was 29.55%, where the worst year was -6.34%. And over the past year, DGRW grew 24%. The average over the past 5 years was 14.59%. And best of all, over the past 10 years, DGRW grew 12.91%, which includes all the expenses and dividends being reinvested. Where by using the same research tool, it states the S&P 500's average over the past 10 years was 13.02%, which is only 0.1% higher. Not only is the growth of DGRW great for a dividend ETF, but the dividends are also paid monthly, and as of 2023, they're stated to be 100% qualified dividends. Now, I will say, if you're someone like me who invests on multiple platforms, I've recently partnered with the company Snowball Analytics, where they provide more tools than you could even think of to to track and analyze all your investments in one place. So whether you're a dividend investor wanting to see all the dividend income you earn across the entire year, what you're expected to earn in the future across all your accounts, or say you have multiple IRAs on different platforms and you want to track them all in one area, many different scenarios, but you can do all of that and connect any of your accounts to automatically sync all your investments easily within seconds. And if that's not enough, you could customize your own portfolio and potentially test out any ideas that you may have, and you can easily extract it to an Excel file within the click of a button. So using their platform has been extremely beneficial for me because it's much easier to see all my investments in one place, show my portfolio through my Patreon, and they even have a mobile app that I frequently open up to just see how my investments are doing overall. Which the best part of all is that you can try this out for free for the first 14 days, no card required, where if you want to get started, I have a link in the description below for you, or promo code DannySully where you can get 10% off. So knowing that, let's now move on to the next option, that is the Vanguard High Dividend Yield, ticker VYM. Understand that of all these dividend ETFs that I'm showing you in this video, you really only need one or two of them to truly gain enough exposure, so consider all the pros and cons to each as you watch through this video. But for VYM, this fund tracks the FTSE High Dividend Yield Index that is 551 holdings, with top ones like Broadcom and JP Morgan, where the top 10 holdings make up 24% of the entire fund, where the largest sector in the fund belongs to financials at 21.1%, and then many others around 10% like industrials, healthcare, consumer staples, energy, technology, and consumer discretionary. And so if we compare this fund and how much overlap it has with the S&P 500, it is lower than the other options at 34%, where the fund also has a low expense of 0.06%, a trailing 12-month dividend yield of 2.87%, with its dividend growth rate being 6.83% over the past 12 months. Now for VYM, the best year in the past 10 years was 26.21%, the worst year was negative 5.91%, and over the last year alone, it grew 19.82%. The average over the past 5 years was 10.28%, and over the past 10 years, it averaged a 9.8% annual return. So this fund pays strong dividends, but just be aware that of all the ones I'm mentioning in this video, it has the lowest historical returns. But it is noted that VYM pays 100% qualified dividends and distributes them on a quarterly basis. Knowing that, if you like this type of fund, but you're less interested in the dividend income and more for the growth, you may be interested in the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF, ticker VIG. Now this fund tracks the S&P US Dividend Growers Index that is 339 holdings, with top ones being Apple, Broadcom, and Microsoft, where the top 10 holdings combined make up roughly 30% of the entire fund. And when we look at the sectors, the largest one is Infotech at 23.5%, with financials and healthcare right after. The fund comes at a 0.06% expense ratio. It has a 42% overlap with the S&P 500, and dividend yield average over the past 12 months of 1.74%, that is growing at an 8% rate over the past 12 months. And so the best year this fund's had over the past 10 years was 29.62%. The worst was negative 9.81%, where just over the past year alone, it grew 22.15%. The average over the past 5 was 12.18%, and over the past 10, the average was 11.72%. Now, VIG also is known to pay 100% qualified dividends on a quarterly basis. So for the decision between VIG and VYM, it's completely a personal choice for you, but I just want to emphasize the fact of going for growth over dividends, because growth over the years of compounding this thing, if you were holding it long term, will actually reap you more benefit than going for the dividends. I will say, if you are interested to see my investments, be notified instantly on significant changes I make, and be part of a private community, consider checking out my Patreon. Now, I will say I have not been impressed with Fidelity's ETFs compared to other alternatives, but there are a few growing on me, where one of them is FDVV. So this fund tracks their own Fidelity High Dividend Index. It has 110 holdings, with the top ones being Apple, Nvidia, and Microsoft, but after that, they're all strong dividend stocks, where the top 10 combined contain 30% of the entire fund. Looking at the sectors, the largest one is Infotech, which may seem like a lot of overlap with the S&P 500, but it's only 39%. Besides that, FDVV has a 0.15% expense ratio. It has a dividend yield of 2.88%, but it's recently declined over the past 12 months. But knowing that, FDVV has actually seen really strong results so far, where the best year since it was officially public in 2016 was 29.28%, and the worst year is the lowest of all the funds in this video at negative 4.19%. And then over the past year, the fund grew 26.89%, 14.1% on average over the past 5 years, and I can't include the 10-year because it hasn't been around that long, but it's going to be really interesting to see how this performs in the next few years. Because I will say, if we exclude DGRW, this fund would have seen the highest returns over the past 5 years compared to the other options. The fund pays dividends quarterly and is the only one I've noticed throughout my research that does not have 100% qualified dividends, where it says in 2022 that reported to be 93%. So that's still a solid amount in qualified dividends. But moving on from that, the last one on this list, in my opinion, is the king of dividend ETFs. That is the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF, ticker SCHD. Now this fund tracks the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index. It currently has 103 holdings that consist of Lockheed Martin and pretty much all other strong dividend investments, where each one has roughly 4% weight toward the fund, that make a total toward the top 10 holdings to be roughly 41.5%. And of all the companies in this fund, the financial sector has the highest amount of exposure at 17.3%, then healthcare, consumer staples, industrial, and energy thereafter. One of my favorite things about this fund, and is a huge reason why I started to invest into it, is that there is only an 8% overlap with the S&P 500. So adding this to your portfolio would just diversify your investments even more. The fund also comes at a low 0.06% expense ratio, has a dividend yield of 3.42% over the past 12 months, that has grown at a rate of 8.86%. And so the best year for SCHD over the past 10 years was 29.87%, where the worst year was negative 7.9%, the S&P 500's worst was negative 18%, and over the past year, SCHD grew 16.17%, which if we then look over the past 5 years, it has averaged a 12.11%, and over the past 10, that was 11.33%, where the dividends are 100% qualified and distributed on a quarterly basis. And so because SCHD is such a popular ETF and one that I already own, I decided to research a comparison on how much overlap there was between the other funds and SCHD. So if we look at DGRW, there's a 22% overlap with SCHD, DGRO has a 21% overlap, FDVV is 15, VIG is 13, and VYM is 22%. If you looked at the average dividend yield, if it were DGRW, that would be 2.49%, DGRO would be 2.81%, FDVV would be 3.15%, VIG 2.58%, and VYM would be 3.15%. Now this is a complete personal decision for you, but I will say, at least for me, I like to pair SCHD with DGRW in a defensive portfolio. This is only one of the 3 taxable accounts that I have, so it's not all of my investments, but the addition of this portfolio provides still significant growth, diversification away from other high growth investments, while still earning a potential dividend income that are taxed as long-term capital gains due to the qualified dividends, where you'll be able to reap monthly and quarterly income from it. And if you are interested, the platform I use for dividend investing, I also link to a high yield savings account. So if you want to get started on that, you can get $25 worth of free stock using the link I have in the description below when you deposit at least $25. Or for the high yield savings account, you can get up to a $325 cash bonus depending on how much you direct deposit. Now, if you want to see my entire dividend investing plan, I highly recommend you check out this video right here, and I'll leave other relevant videos in the description below of this video. And as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this.